Welcome to the Lawyer Life podcast, where the personal, professional, and political intersect. Each week, we cover a topic to help ourselves and other lawyers navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. On today's episode, it's the inaugural LLP at the movies. We've watched Won't You Be Our Neighbor, the Mr. Rogers documentary, and we have a lot to say. I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, won't you be my neighbor, Darlene?
Good morning. Yes, won't you be my neighbor? You said, won't you be our neighbor, which is more apropos, really, for the podcast, since you and I are going to talk about Mr. Rogers.
That's true.
Mike and Darlene's neighbor. Join us.
We are not neighbors. Although I'm trying to tempt you to become a neighbor of me.
It's true. It's very true. Anyway, how are you on this fine Friday morning, almost spring?
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I've had a huge lawyerly morning so far.
Me too.
It's 9:55, and
Yeah.
I was up at 6 notarizing a document for a neighbor who's taking their kids across the border. That was fun. It's a very lawyerly morning. I've never felt so lawyerly than sort of rolling out of bed and pulling out my notary stamp.
That stamp has such power. I love the stamp with my name on it. Everybody loves it when they see it.
This makes us so important. Only we can have this stamp.
What an interesting thing.
It really
notarizing
is. It is a really funny thing. I feel so strange doing it. It's a little bit of a throwback to another time, right? You know, do you swear?
Yeah.
It's true. Anyways, that happened. And then it's been a bit of a rush. And I've got family coming in this week to hang out and take a little bit of a break. So I'm excited. But I want to talk about Mr. Rogers first, obviously.
Yeah. So we watched this documentary film with the goal of trying to, as we normally do, take like we do with books or other things, take this thing and see what we can learn from it. And it turns out there's a lot there. But before we start to delve into what we learned, you and I both have similar feelings generally, especially as like being kids seeing the Mr. Rogers television show that we wanted to talk about.
Yes, I will say, so I think to give the proper context for why Won't You Be My Neighbor has ended up as a LLP topic, really, I watched it thinking, as listeners know, I've taken a little bit of a time off break this month where I've actually just watched things for fun, so I thought. So I watched this documentary, and I was just struck during the watching of this documentary that there's a lot of overlap with some of the themes that we talk about with respect to lawyers and living an authentic life and all that stuff. So I arm twisted you to watch it. Is that fair?
No, I always planned to watch it.
Oh, you planned to watch it. Okay, I upped your timeline on the Mr. Rogers documentary.
Yeah.
And suggested as a topic. But I will say, I kept seeing this. Everyone has been talking about this. This has been quite a critically acclaimed documentary. It's apparently the top grossing biographical documentary of all time.
What?
I think just people are interested in Mr. Rogers. I think people watched it thinking, because I did, I kind of was like, maybe there's some story about Mr. Rogers. I think that it's an inherently interesting proposition just to hear about what was going on with him. He's an interesting guy. And so the context that you're referencing, though, is that I did not like the show as a kid, like really actively did not enjoy the show. However, it was a time of linear television and you had to watch whatever was on back in the day. I don't know that Mr. Rogers would be successful in today's world.
Out there. Paw Patrol versus Mr. Rogers. I know who's winning.
On demand would, I think, be a challenge for Mr. Rogers. But anyway.
Although the thing made me wish that I could access his show on demand for my daughter because there's good stuff there. And
totally.
So let's get into it. The first thing you mentioned, like, because he's a fascinating dude. A lot of people are fascinated by Mr. Rogers, and I think that's the one of the great things to take generally from what he did, the documentary, is that he was like a unique kind of singular person. His focus was so clear on what he wanted to do, and that informed not only his profession, but seemingly his whole life. He just was dedicated to helping children get through the beginnings of their life in a successful way. and seemed to never really veer from that path. That seemed to be his core, really, for a very long time.
Well, and what I thought was so interesting, and maybe connected to our lawyerly ways, was that he saw TV. So TV was new at the time that Mr. Rogers decided to get into that medium. He had previously been planning to go into the ministry, so he is an ordained Presbyterian minister, which I did not know. But he saw a television program. He looked to the TV, the 1960s, and he saw
Mhm.
it as a medium for his message, basically. And what I think is so interesting about the why of that is that he says in the documentary that, and we should, since this is our first film review, we should
Oh
say there are a
yeah.
couple spoilers in here. But it's, we're going to talk about points of the documentary, but I think on balance, even after listening to this, it would still be worth watching. But one of the things that he says at the beginning is he thought TV was going to be kind of an evil. He saw it having the potential to really speed things up for kids and really feed them advertising and stuff like that. And instead of just becoming like a crusader against TV, he chose to become sort of one of the most I mean, he didn't know this at the time, but he became a television personality
Hmm.
to do it properly. And that I thought was that spoke to me, because I thought, one of the things that I've always been interested in doing is working with the traditional law firm model and trying to make it one that I think is more accommodating of lifestyles and interesting people and careers, and I don't know. Anyway, so I've always wanted to mess with the model um, out of almost like a hope for what could be, as opposed to a desire to criticize what is. And I think that really, I connected with that right off the bat. And then, you know,
Oh, you're the Mr. Rogers for the legal model.
oh my God. If you had said that to me before the documentary, I'd be like, what? Never say that again.
That's so
But now I'm
good.
like, that's kind of cool. I don't know. That to me just was like an unexpected thing, because I don't know that people do that very often. You see something you don't like, you don't plunge right into it, you know?
And that paid dividends for him too. I think that his focus on what it could be, the aspirational focus, really led to success for him personally, but also in his mission to change television. There is that
Mhm.
moment in a documentary. So for context, it was I think a Congress committee hearing where they're considering reducing, basically striking the public television budget $20 million, just getting rid of it, being one of public television. And Mr. Rogers appeared at the hearing. And after a long day of people just reading, their statements, the gentleman presiding was obviously just, and seemed to be a bit of a character, was just basically like, this is all nothing. I don't want to hear anybody read statements anymore. I'm not convinced. Basically we're cutting this budget. And what Mr. Rogers did was dictate some lyrics from a song that he performs on his show, which was so striking to uh, the committee chair that he said, okay, I think you just saved the $20 million. He was convinced on the spot because Mr. Rogers didn't focus on what TV is and blah, 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 but he showed what the power can be. And therefore, it really helped save public television in a significant way. And that shows that clarity of purpose, can really pay great dividends, I think.
Well, and truth. I think when I saw that scene, I
Mm-hmm.
also thought, if you said, imagine laying out that strategy. I'm going to go in there to the Senate committee hearing, and I'm going to sing a song from my television show. um, you know, there would be so many people around you saying, "Oh, stick to the script." He's going to want to hear numbers. He's going to want to hear business. He's going to want to hear valuation. Blah blah blah. And I think what was so powerful about that, and a lesson too that is useful for us, is just that, when you speak the truth, it has more power than almost anything else. If Mr. Rogers, being who he is, had stood up there and read a bunch of, stats, it wouldn't have worked.
Mm-hmm.
He presented the way he can present, and he really charmed the guy. I mean, the guy, he didn't even ask any questions. He just said, you can have $22 million. And that shouldn't work. Like, the things that Mr. Rogers does should not work. He shouldn't be on TV for 40 years. He shouldn't be able to earn 20 million from a 30-second statement.
Mhm.
But it's just so, I almost think it's because it's so unusual, right? The way that he approaches things.
That is, and that's kind of the core, I think, of the interest about him, and his effect is that he was at his core unusual and looked at, in his space, he worked in children's television, but he saw it in a profoundly different way than the rest of the market did, right? Everybody else is like
Mhm.
flashy, 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 quick, 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 simple storylines. And he's just like, let's sit in silence and let's do a week on death, and like,
Yeah,
and
or
oh
the
my gosh.
assassination of Robert Kennedy. I mean, like, these are big
Oh,
topics,
yeah.
but kids do
Yeah.
ask about that stuff. And I think that's the other thing is when he was giving his presentation, you could see this is not a guy who's here to make money. This is not a guy here to
Mm-hmm.
be a star. This is a guy
Mm-hmm.
here who loves children and wants them to succeed, and he believes he can help them. And it was really compelling to see him off camera with that view, right? Because the television personality is sort of one side of it, but he really was totally consistent from off screen to on screen, according to the documentary.
And I think part of that consistency is that he just prioritized, seemingly, like, as corny as it sounds, he prioritized love and love of people over everything. Like everything was, that's how he ministered. Like he talks about ministry of the job, and I think it's an interesting phrase. And obviously, he was a minister, but it's a fascinating thing to consider. Of like, yes, you do your job, but what is the thing in that's at its core that you're trying to do while you go about your daily business, right? What's bigger
Mhm.
than just delivering the work product? For him, you know, delivering a show at the end of the day, and like I've worked in television where we made 4 shows a week. That is a grind, and it's not easy, especially when he's
Mhm.
doing 10 characters voices and doing like composing the music. Like what a like talented guy. But that in itself can be all consuming. He had a purpose sitting above that of just getting the job done, which was love and helping young people feel loved. And how could you not, if you are so rooted in that higher purpose, how could you not feel good a lot of the time and be consistent? Because that wins the day, I think. And that's a wonderful place to be, for most of your time, thinking about that instead of thinking about, oh god, I have to make another show today, and that
Well,
sort of
can
thing.
you imagine if he was like a vacuum salesperson or some other like career,
Yeah.
even a minister, even dealing with adults most of his day, I think would have been
Yeah.
quite stifling for him, right? And I was thinking, what is that? What is that thing that he's doing? And actually, I think it's something we've spoken about on previous episodes, but the term consonance, do you remember this term?
No.
Aligning who you are with what you do. Consonance,
Okay.
which I think is really what he was, like it never probably even occurred to him really to do something else once he saw this path kind of open itself up to him. And I think that's what like my belief always is, if you are very aligned as like in your person with the job that you do in the day, you're going to be better at it. You're going to be awesome at it. You're going to be able to do
Yeah.
things that people would always say is not possible. Like if you said, again, back to this kind of I always sort of picture this board of unsupportive people sometimes when I'm about to do something. I mix in there my red team and my green team, also a throwback to another episode. But sometimes when you're imagining how people are going to respond to something that you're going to do, it does sound kind of crazy sometimes, depending what your idea is. And in his case, I'm going to have this thing where I like put on a sweater and take off a sweater and open a closet and sing the same song.
Mhm.
And that's going to be a cornerstone of my show. I mean, no one would say that's a good idea. No one.
Mhm.
But yet it works. And I sort of watching that, I was like, well, you know what? This works, one, because it's who he is. He really wants a different sweater. He wants different shoes when he
Yeah.
walks in the house. I never got that. I never wore shoes in the house as a kid. I was always like, why does he wear shoes in the
Why
house?
is he
Like,
putting more shoes on?
there were so many questions about that raised. Um, but I thought about it differently as an adult watching it, because I lived in a
Mhm.
very stable home. I didn't need an adult demonstrating consistency and security and predictability and
Mhm.
amazing. And it, like, again, so him, and no one else could really even do that. I don't think.
And speaking of things that no one else could do, there's a moment that's featured. He has this tiger, Daniel, that he is one of the puppets that everybody says is basically Mr. Rogers in a puppet form, and and sings a song about feeling like he's a fake or that he's a mistake, and that one of the deepest songs I think I've ever heard, and it comes
Totally.
from a puppet, tiger puppet. No one else could do that, and I think this is so applicable for what we're trying to. One of the things we're trying to get at with this podcast. So mistakes happen and so on, and it's more about you just being you and being authentic. And he says a line which I think is so great, and that is, you don't have to do anything sensational for people to love you. And
Hmm.
for type A high achieving folks, which generally funnel into this profession, I think that's such a profound statement, because what is likely comes from that type of person is a history of doing very well in school and winning awards and getting promotions, and that obviously a lot of attention in life goes to those achievements, and some of them are sensational. But in the end, good old Mr. Rogers was looking through the camera at 5-year-old saying, "You're good, just you. You don't have to do anything sensational for folks to love you." That's one of the things I thought was so unique to what the message he was trying to deliver, and one of the large things I took away from watching the documentary.
Well, and on that point, I was picturing, like, had he gone into like being just a regular minister, which is,
Yeah.
as you say, is a pretty sensational achievement, probably the apex of careers at that time in that area that he lived in. And he had he done that, he would have had the maybe more public support at the beginning. He would have had the A's on his report card that we always talk about. He would
Mm.
have had the pats on the back and the sort of, vaunted reputation and stuff like that. But I don't think he would have been as happy, because he wouldn't have been spending all of his time on, for example, creativity for children. And it would have just been a small portion of his job, which would have, maybe would have sustained him. But he knocked it out of the park by doing that 100% of his time, right? And I thought of that, a non Mr. Rogers example, but one that has always kind of stuck out to me. There's a another biography of Kurt Cobain, lead singer of Nirvana.
Oftentimes when I think of Mr. Rogers, I immediately think of Kurt Cobain.
This is how my brain
I
works.
get them mixed up a lot of the time. Which one hosted a
Stay with
famous
me.
TV show for decades, and which one was the charismatic and unfortunately early death lead singer of Nirvana? I don't know.
Well, I think they're opposites in one way, which is they're similar in the way that they both achieved some. I think Mr. Rogers is probably globally famous. Kurt
Do you
Cobain
think?
certainly, probably at minimum.
Okay.
Let's talk North America for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the interesting thing is that in this Heavier Than Heaven book, which is excellent, one line really stuck out for me because I mean, Kurt Cobain, died by suicide at age 27, at the height of his fame, right? And I think most people think like, why? I mean, taking addiction out of it, which is a sort of a one big piece of that. There's a line in that book that says that Kurt was never happier than when he was a kid's soccer coach, with like the
Mm.
YMCA or the Kiwanis Club in Washington. And I've always thought of that because I just thought, that's not something that there are a lot of points for. That's not something that society mobilizes the entire mechanism of advertising and PR to tell you is like a job that you should be wanting to do. Whereas, you grow up and you're like, I played 3 chords on my guitar. I got to be a rock star. And if I
Yeah.
am, I will get the untold, treasures of the universe. And, the fact is, what stuck with that for me is that, yeah, he did become the most famous rock star in the world, but he wasn't really that happy doing that. And he had been messaged so hard for his whole life that he would be happy when he started doing that,
Mm-hmm.
that once he did, and he was like, well, I'm not happy, must be me. That's where I think it's really problematic that we push people in that direction. I think in law and maybe other professions, these professions where we're kind of, if you are a lawyer for your parents, you've kind of arrived, right? And in society, there's a lot of lawyers have a lot of trust from society, and people think it's a great gig to have, and I think it is done properly and done in a way that's consonant. But there's also this thing that if it wasn't your thing, it might not make you happy. And I think we struggle with that as a profession because a lot of people who are in law were just really smart arts grads. So
Yeah.
there probably are some people who made puppets in their undergrad degree and really loved that and ended up in law school and now are doing, insurance litigation or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's, yes, no real other similarities between Kurt Cobain and Mr. Rogers, but I'm always fascinated with people who are at the top of their game and the ones that are happy there and the ones that wear it heavily. You
Mhm.
got to kind of look at both, I think, because you can't just look at a famous person and be like, oh, they're on easy street because they're famous. Like, that's not true. Anyway, I digress.
The
Back to the movie and the
No,
puppet.
but I think that's wonderful, and he generally did seem to be a happy person. The film also, and I think it's important, shows that toward the end of it all, he got a bit angry
Mm.
when he was seeing that, you know, TV was getting worse, the effect on children was getting worse. And he also, at a point, as I think a lot of people might have at this point in time, felt defeated and like none of what he did mattered when 9/11 occurred. Um,
Mhm.
and so, uh, even for somebody who were just like lauding for doing so well at finding his purpose, finding a way to channel the purpose through this interesting, medium, always, seemingly practicing what he preaches, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be wonderful, and there will be frustrations and there will be times where you question yourself. And he wrote a memo to himself about, can I really do this? You see those um, you know tougher moments as well, which I think is important to note. And as we chat about, these things occur even to the highest performing and happiest folks as well.
Well, and because what he's doing is pretty important and he's tackling a pretty huge problem, right? Like it's not, I did have the sense, and I won't go into it maybe on the podcast just in case people want to watch till the end. But yes, there is definitely sadness when terrible things happen because he views his job as to explain tough stuff to kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
In part. And so the tougher those things were, September 11th being obviously a big one, that must have really weighed heavily on him. So I do think that there is this sort of sometimes a feeling in the world of pursuing happiness in your own life that sometimes it's like, oh, that means there's no hard stuff, or that means that you should shun all negativity and stuff. I don't really agree with that. I just think it's like you should let the negativity, like use your powers on the negativity that matters, kind of like there's always going to be negativity. Try not to, in my world, I just try to have it not come in from sources that I don't need. I don't need to watch violent television or whatever, like, eh.
Mm-hmm.
But I do need to use the things that I'm learning to help other people who are not in good spots. You don't want to turn away from that because you're trying to maintain pristine positivity and happiness, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think I'm glad that you had a similar response to the documentaries. Thought there was some fodder there for people who are trying to consider how to live in a more fulfilling and happy place. What can we learn from Mr. Rogers? Do you have one of your patented Mike Anderson summaries?
I have my own takeaways, which I'm sure other people have different takeaways. So I would say there's three things. The first thing is I really admired his like higher purpose that always sat above the work he did. And I think that's an
Mm.
interesting thing for all of us to consider is what is that? What is that for us? Because that can sustain, inform, and provide some advantages at some point in time. So having that overriding purpose, I think, uh, is imperative. The second thing is that he did happen because of that overriding purpose, I think, to find, as somebody says in the movie, I think the quote is, he's doing the one thing in the world that he wishes to do, and he's by any definition a happy man. And I think that
Mm.
if we all focus, so we have our high purpose, we try to channel it into the thing that we think we're meant to do, like the day to day thing, a great way to achieve happiness. And I think finally, people are drawn to him because he didn't fit into a mold, and he is very unique. You don't build a kids television presenter that way. but it
Right.
still works. And I think that it's a great takeaway to remember that there's a lot of ways to get a job done, and there's strengths in people that we don't necessarily see instantly, and that having diverse people do a job is important. And so that would be the last thing for me, is that a lot of people remember him because there was nobody else like him. And so
Mhm.
that means that you can be somebody who on its face doesn't seem to fit in a certain place. But that doesn't mean you won't succeed, and it might mean that you have a better chance to be a really notable person in that space.
Well, and it was so one of the things about him is that he chose to be on PBS, so public television. And that allowed him to
Mm.
do some pretty bold things, and to not have to be sort of constrained by the profit issue or advertisers, right? Like there's some pretty poignant stuff that he does to support um, or to oppose racial segregation in the 60s and 70s. Really powerful images. And he was able to do those in part because that was genuine to him, but also all of these things are such a just he made so many choices along the way that were like the right choices for him that all added up to his impact, you know? Like if
Mhm.
he had chosen to be doing a kid's show but still prioritizing profit, he might not have been able to do some of that stuff. It might not have been um, as possible as a public station. So anyway, I think overall, great impact and coming from a place of trying to do what he was, put on the planet to do, probably.
Agreed. Okay. So we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our goods and gripes. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law, experienced legal counsel when and where you need us. To learn more about Inter Alia, visit the website. That's spelled INTERALIA-law.com. Thank you. And we are back with our goods and gripes. Goods are things we want to promote and support. Gripes are things that annoy us. Darlene.
Well, I have a good. So our team of lawyers is growing. So we've just added a new lawyer, Dunya. Welcome, Dunya. If you're listening, yay! Welcome, Dunya. So now we are, I guess, 6. And I was sitting there ready to do the announcement. So Dunya she's coming back into practice after staying home with her young kids. And I know that the usual thing to do is to sort of gloss over, try to explain breaks in resumes. And that may be, I don't know, that's not really something I'm that concerned about. But when I posted on LinkedIn, I actually put in the post that she was coming back from 4 years at home with her kids, and that she's been developing skills that we highly value here at Inter Alia. And I would say to you that I had a brief moment of like, not panic, but just kind of, is this wise? I talked about it with her. We decided that that was a message we both were comfortable putting out there. And I just said, I'm like, the Speaker of the House in the United States was a stay-at-home mom for most of her life. She's the most powerful woman in the United States, and her skills were honed at home with her 4 kids. So I really I value it. I value it highly. So why not talk about it in the posting? So we did. And my good is that I got a whole bunch of extremely positive feedback. And I felt like it was something that, needed to be done,
Mm-hmm.
kind of. And then I kind of realized afterwards, it was like, you don't see that very often as a career positive. And it really should be because, taking time to prioritize family is not a career liability or a personal liability or any kind of liability. So that was cool. And I think that was sort of a wake up call for me to just be even more than I am already. Just if I think it, say it. And you never know don't assume the answer is going to be negative. Maybe we've all just thought it would be negative, and instead it's super positive. So that was a major highlight and led to all kinds of really interesting conversations this week that I was not expecting to have. So awesome.
That is an awesome. That's more than a good.
An
That's
awesome.
an awesome.
Yeah, that was
Great.
awesome on so many levels.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that occurred. I agree. My good is I've been asked to be a best man.
Oh, that's cool.
My best friend Brad. I told him I would mention him in the podcast. He's getting married this summer, and I'm being his best man, and that's a wonderful privilege. So that has been a highlight for me this week. Very good.
Wow, did he choose you because of your skills as a podcaster? Oh, okay.
He did not.
Congratulations, Brad and
Jane.
Brad and Jane. Congratulations, Brad and Jane. Cool.
My gripe is that this is like a pretty spot on gripe, I think. My cell phone has a headphone jack, so I don't have an iPhone. I have a non-iPhone. Okay, get ready. And the headphone jack, I have realized slowly over time, has been filling with pocket lint. And
oh my God,
that is causing my headphones to malfunction. I removed a lot of the pocket lint, but I think some is still in there, or I damaged the thing when I was removing the pocket lint. So now I can only use my Bluetooth headset. And that is my
oh my God,
gripe
that's
for
your
today.
all-time most mundane gripe, but I appreciate that.
Idea how annoying it is. Oh, it's like the audio goes between my ears as I'm like walking the dog and stuff. Oh my goodness. Gripe City. Welcome to the Gripe Nation, everybody. That's the top gripe. Yeah.
We've gone from no gripes to Gripe Nation. This has been a fast descent. I have a gripe, and it's actually not that gripey, but it's something I thought was worth mentioning on the podcast because, maybe listeners are trying to figure out how to put more balance into their life, be there more for their kids, stuff like that. We talk a lot about the fact that I try to prioritize that in as significant a way as I can, given demands on time. And my son and I had this great conversation yesterday where I was explaining to him that one of his superpowers is that he is, says really nice things and people really like to hear what he has to say. And he pondered for a while. He was quiet. And I said, so do you think mom has any superpowers? And I was kind of hoping, I would say I had some expectation around what his answer might be, which I will share in a second. His answer was, after thinking for a protracted amount of time, I want to be clear, this took a really long time. He's like, how about really good working? And I was like, oh, whoa. And I thought, if I was a mom who wasn't there for my kids as many hours of the day as I am, that would be such a crushing answer. Right. But I raise it on the podcast to say, in his mind, you have to, what I realized in that moment was his standard is I should be here 100% of the time. I should be playing with him 100% of the time. And any deviation from that is notable to him. And so, always just striving for improvements there. His second one was a bit better about being a nice mom or something. But, the fact that working thing came up first and required so much thought was very negative from my perspective.
I'd say that's a positive. I mean, reading about, how parents can make a well-functioning kid is a lot of it is that they see you working hard. And I know that you've mentioned in previous episodes that you worry about because you try to be so present with them that they might not realize how much work you're doing in the background. So there is some sort of I think it's good for them to know that you are, a mom that also happens to run this great company and do great work. And that can have really positive effects too. So it might not only be a bad thing.
Well, having the neighbor come for the notary stamp this morning was interesting because suddenly my son has seen hard evidence of what I do, which involves a mysterious stamp. Right. So,
What? And making somebody swear to something? Who is
yeah,
my mom?
suddenly the neighbor. Yeah. Anyway, it's maybe don't ask your kid what your superpowers are.
Yeah, I don't
That's
want to
maybe
know.
that's.
So anyway,
Oh my gosh. Okay.
great
Well,
stuff.
thank you for this. We'll be back next week.
We will. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Okay, talk soon.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.